So I'll hit record whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okie dokie. And how much time do you want to do today? Like, what's your schedule like?
I think I have to be somewhere at 5:30, so I can't really go too long. If you want to break it up in two parts, that's fine too. I don't know how much material we've got.
We can always do a part 2 as well if
Perfect.
You can't ever exhaust Chesterton, so.
Right. Well, That'd be good because then I could actually follow up on my reading. But let me just do a kind of a semi-formal intro. That's right.
It's so good. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Michael Basham. He is the proprietor and head host of the show SpiritWars that I found out and know about through the Fringe Radio Network. His show is the most listened to show on that network. So it's really a delight to have him on my show. And the subject we're going to talk about tonight is G.K. Chesterton, somebody who came to my attention through my researches of Aleister Crowley, not somebody I knew very much in detail, but Mike Basham knows a lot about G.K. Chesterton, and he did a show that I listened to with great interest about The Everlasting Man, which is a book that he really enjoyed. So I tried to do some reading on Chesterton myself, read his book Orthodoxy, which I found profoundly interesting, but we're just going to kind of talk about some stuff. But Mike, are you there?
Hello, William Ramsey. It is a delight to be here today again.
Good. I
works of Chesterton here on my Amazon Kindle, profoundly created by Mr. Bezos for us to enjoy.
So you can get Chesterton wherever you are in lovely Hawaii, and get some pretty deep thinking associated with Christianity. And I think actually some of his topics I found of interest when I was reading Orthodoxy was how timely he was, because he was addressing the liberalism of his day, evolutionism, materialism, these big kind of loaded terms, but really trying to address them from a Christian perspective. So I really appreciated that in Orthodoxy. But maybe for the people who don't know your name, maybe talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in Chesterton. We could start from there.
Oh, yes. Well, I found Chesterton in a Jesuit university in Tokyo, which I was obsessed with Japanese culture, and coming from a kind of a Christian, my grandfather, Don Basham, helping to sort of organize the charismatic Holy Spirit deliverance ministry stuff with Derek Prince. I was never exposed to Catholicism in any way, shape, or form. And when I found Chesterton, along with my grandfather's book in the dormitory where I was in Tokyo, being, separated from all my friends, family, I'm a big family guy, a seeker of the Spirit, and one that wants to find the truth, really walk with the Lord. But I found something in Everlasting Man one day in Peter Millward's office, who had a letter from C.S. Lewis and had attended Tolkien's lectures, and on his desk, the Chesterton Award for 2003. I was so amazed by this meeting. I was like, wow, maybe I can just join him and study in the Renaissance Institute in Tokyo. And he was from England, really sweet, humble, kind of funny guy, a little bit like Chesterton humor-wise. And but that very night, I ended up meeting the Family International and ended up joining the famous cult of which we spoke about last time, the Children of God all over the world. And they introduced me to some more of this like InfoWar mystic type of Christianity. But Chesterton remains as kind of a lighthouse of truth and a foundation of not just Christendom, but all reality, connecting to everything literary and just our Western culture at its core. I would say that he's probably the most influential person I've ever come into contact with, just poring over those pages of Everlasting Man, which C.S. Lewis in his autobiography said got him saved. Basically, that was the final straw for him. And I'm here in this liberal university listening to horrible lectures by just total god-awful, human-hating professors. And then I would go home and just drink Chesterton. It was just, man, I mean, we're going to talk about it today, but I'm interested to see your perspective on it, especially with your understanding of Crowley and for which you're most known for, you actually found the quote from Crowley about Chesterton. I thought that was amazing.
Well, there's a number of quotes actually that I included in my book, Prophet of Evil. There was something, Crowley really thought of Chesterton as an intellectual equal, but there was one thing that I had was a critique of Crowley's Soul of Osiris by Chesterton. And then there was something that Crowley, he penned something called Why Jesus Wept, which was an anti-Christian text, and he dedicated part of it to Mr. Chesterton. So he seemed to think that he was kind of countering, I think, Chesterton's pro-Christianity with his own anti. But I can read the quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says, if Mr. Crowley and the New Mystics think if Mr. Crowley and the New Mystics think for one moment that a broken temple of Osiris is more supernatural than a Baptist chapel in Brixton, then they are sectarians, and only sectarians of no more value to humanity than those who think that the English soil is the only soil worth defending. Mr. Crowley is a strong and genuine poet, and we have little doubt that he will work up from his appreciation of the Temple of Osiris that loftier and wider work of the human imagination, the appreciation of the Brixton Chapel. So that was something that Chesterton wrote about Crowley. And then Crowley, this is before he had this kind of self-professed revelation in Egypt in 1904, where he received the Book of the Law, but he writes to Chesterton, Dedicatio Extraordinaria in Latin. Dear Mr. Chesterton, alone among the puerile apologists of your detestable religion, you hold a reasonably mystic head above the tides of criticism. You are the last champion of God. With you I choose to measure myself. Others I can despise. You are a force to be reckoned with, as Browning, your intellectual father, was before you. Whether we are indeed friends or enemies, it is perhaps hard to say. It has sometimes seemed to me that human freedom and happiness are our common goal, but that you found your muddied oaths in gods, ministers, passive resistors, and all the religious team. The Brixton Bahinchits, I don't even know what that word means, we might call them. While I, at once a higher mystic and colder skeptic, found my Messiah in Charles Watts and the devil and all his angels. The occasion of this letter is the insertion of a scene equivalent to an appreciation of the Brixton Chapel. So he's referencing Chesterton's earlier analysis of Crowley in my masterpiece, Why Jesus Wept, and I hope you will like it. Can I do more than make your Brixton my deus ex machina? You see, when I wrote The Soul of Osiris, Europe was my utmost in travel. Today, what country of the globe has not shuddered with the joy of my presence? The virgin snows of Chogori, the gloomy jungles of Burma, filled with savage buffaloes and murderous chins, the peace of Waikiki, the breeding, hopeful putrefaction of America, the lonely volcanoes of Mexico, the everlasting furnace sands of Egypt, all these have known me. Travel thou thus far, thou also. Somewhat shalt thou learn. But otherwise, gird on thine armor for thy Christ, O champion of the dying faith in man dead. So pretty interesting. And then he says, arm and out, for the young warrior of a new religion is upon thee, and his number is the number of a man. So he wrote
amazing. And when you mentioned Waikiki, I was like, what? We just moved there, and we're like, why are we here? It's like a hellhole of crime and filth and villainy, and in the Dagobah star system, you will never find a more villainous hive.
Right. Well, it looks good on the map, right? All the postcards look legit, and then you get there, yeah.
But there's so much crime here. I wouldn't be surprised if Crowley left his mark.
Wouldn't be surprised. Place. But yeah, so that was really kind of my intro to Chesterton. So
okay,
I have not read The Everlasting Man. I did read Orthodoxy, which I thought, man, it's one of those books you finish and you go, okay, I got to start again, because it's very, very kind of compact concepts and things that you kind of need to definitely take some time to unpack. But I think I got the gist of it. I thought it was pretty fascinating, very well reasoned, ordered book. Definitely couched in his time, like very you could call it turgid prose, you could call it very deep prose, but they called him Chesterton, the author of paradox. So he uses these opposing concepts, and then really kind of investigates each of them, whether a reason and imagination, these kind of things, and then really unpacks it. But he also has references of people he knew and Crowley knew. So you kind of see these same characters that Crowley's bringing up with Yeats, William Butler Yeats, and Annie Besant, and actually addresses them. So it's actually I found him to be not really some kind of dusty old thinker that was something really dated. I found him very contemporary in his outlook and insight.
The greatest novelist of our time, American novelist Michael Crichton, that wrote Jurassic Park, before he died, he discovered Chesterton, and he wrote about him just with the same kind of reaction and saying, well, a lot of the content obviously needs to be updated. A lot of the references people are totally lost on. But he was a contemporary. He was someone that was interfacing with the people like H.G. Wells, who wrote New World Order, and he was diametrically opposed to their philosophies. And these were the birthing of the Nazis and the communists and all these philosophies. And when you read, at least on my ebook here, the one after Our Orthodoxy is a book called What's Wrong with the World. And this book is a collection of essays which really just discuss the importance of humanity, the beauty of family, and the necessary, the necessity of protection of property. And then he just, against that, the backdrop of all the just total craziness of what then were the libtards, the kind of the people, the AOCs and the Clintons and these people that are just such slick liars today. Well, their progenitors, their genesis were these people that Chesterton was interfacing with all the time, and he was friends with them. He would sit down and have a cup of tea, and talk with them. But with Crowley, he would not meet. I looked that up, and I was like, whoa, he did not want to. He was like the most disgusting, detestable person I've ever come into contact with. And he invited me to come talk with him, and he was just like, this guy. And obviously I haven't been reading enough Chesterton really to sound so done darn smart these days. That's why I'm wearing these glasses. They're just sunglasses I poked out the glass from.
It makes you look studious.
Dude, indeed. My wife bought this tie. She's like, you're finally wearing it. Like, yeah, it's the first time I've ever worn it. But the feminism, he goes into what is so mystically wonderful about women, but then he destroys feminism while almost creating goddesses out of the females. I mean, it's amazing how I would really recommend What's Wrong with the World as one of these. You kind of just pick up an essay and read it in an hour or less, just studiously read some of his, not even an hour. You can probably go through it in like a couple, in like 20 minutes or so. But what did you find in Orthodoxy that really struck you? Like I'll open it up and maybe we can go through anything in there that was really on your heart.
Well, I would just say that he just the kind of the way he addressed his faith, that he was really just bolstering what he thought was the Apostles' Creed, but the way he went about it was not coming straight out and talking about the Apostles' Creed. He actually started off in Orthodoxy talking about the insane asylum, because he wrote the book near an insane. I can't remember which the name of the asylum was in northwestern London, but he kept referencing. So he's talking about human reason and imagination and kind of counterposing those concepts, and really came out and said imagination is the safeguard of the mind and human spirit, and that human reason always ends up into this place over here, this crazy house. And so once he starts laying out these chapters, there's 9 chapters in the book, but his summation in the last 2 chapters, I think, are fantastic, because he keeps kind of putting these opposites together, unpacking them, and then the summation is, okay, this is why we believe what we believe in Christendom. So I think, he said, and he kind of like included this notion of romance. So he really bolstered the aspect of Christianity of not knowing, not actually knowing everything, but willing to accept things that you don't know. And I think one of the chapters was the romance of Yeah, I mean, I think it was the romance. What's the name of the chapter? Romance of
Romance
our
of
orthodoxy. So
Orthodoxy.
yeah, so he
Yeah.
talks about orthodoxy, but I think in the common, and he doesn't mean Orthodox Catholic Church or anything like that.
No.
It really means the Orthodox ideas. But I think that most people would think of the orthodoxy, at least I would at least think of it as kind of like, okay, this is this, lettered notions within Christendom. But I think the way
Yes.
that he thought about it was that all of these things really made sense. The fall of man, original sin,
Mm-hmm.
things that we take for granted. So I think that, those were definite themes within the book. But I like the way, when I kind of was able to digest it, I like the way that he came at it, because he came at it not really oblique, but he took his time talking about concerns that people have about. He actually talked a lot about evolutionary. So this kind of man-based reason, really, he spent time on before he used all of those critiques from the earlier chapters in his summation in the last two chapters. So those are just some of the takeaways that I tell you. And you can see the kind of way that Chesterton thinks too, is that he's not afraid of paradox, and he's not
Yeah.
afraid of really kind of like looking at the really giving axioms greater meaning by looking at their opposite, logical syllogism, if you will. So like how he will take a word and then flip it and then unpack it. So you see him doing that over and over again. And that's really kind of like was an element of his style that was unique. But yeah.
Very eloquently spoken, Mr. Ramsey and Professor Ramsey. I would say it's so good. It's so exciting for me to see you get into Chesterton, and just your mind and your curiosity and balance and take on this is like, yes, William Ramsey versus Chesterton. Yeah. And it's hard to really talk about him on the radio or on YouTube, because what usually ends up happening is people read it and it's hard to follow. I mean, this is a quote from Orthodoxy that I pulled up here, just that one of the most interesting points that he always brings out in every book, practically in every writing, is that ordinary things are more valuable than extraordinary things. Nay, they are more extraordinary. And the idea that just normal everyday things in life have almost like an elfland mystical quality to them. The man in one of his novels breaking into a house, going in through the roof and coming in and looking through the stuff on the desk, and then the door opens and a woman appears there, and you find out it's his house, that's his wife, and he's just having fun breaking into his own house to make it more amazing. And he wrote a lot of detective fiction, which I don't think BBC did a super good job with Father Brown, but the whole idea of a priest is the best detective because he knows original sin. He's so acquainted with the fallen nature of humanity, so he's excellent at just figuring out who done it, kind of things. But with the ethics of Elfland, I thought was a really, really great chapter in Orthodoxy. The way that he does sort of take his time to get to the point, in the last few paragraphs and then the last few sentences are like these like lightning bolts and like fireworks going off. I mean, we just don't have people that write that way anymore.
No, I don't think so. It's not.
But
it's not. What do you call it? Fashionable to write like.
And people, I've heard criticism about him, and I've kind of moved away from C.S. Lewis back into Chesterton, and I'm like, man, you got to read Chesterton. And I met a Catholic that was like, I don't really like Chesterton, because at least C.S. Lewis gives you the ability to debate with him, but Chesterton is just like, nope, this is it. This is the truth. And I thought that was interesting. Like, it's so difficult to fight Chesterton that I think what modern intelligentsia has done is they've just kind of buried him and hope that people won't find him. And then the Catholics kind of just read him and worship him, but you don't really know what's going on half the time. So
I want to read a quote from the Ethics of Elfland, that chapter. It was, I think, chapter 4, but it says, and the strongest emotion was that life was as precious as it was puzzling. It was an ecstasy because it was an adventure. It was an adventure because it was an opportunity. The goodness of the fairy tale was not affected by the fact that there might be more dragons and princesses. It was good to be in a fairy tale. So in some ways, that's the way he's looking at it. And then in that chapter, he also references Crowley's antagonist and contemporary W.B. Yeats, like we talked about in the pre-show. But he says, here's his quote of Yeats: "Ride on the crest of the disheveled tide and dance upon the mountains like a flame. It is a dreadful thing to say that Mr. W.B. Yeats does not understand fairyland, but I do say it." That's interesting that it's just part of his he was very, obviously in his writing, he was very well acquainted with what was going on in the world at that time, referencing people, artists. And I would call him a kind of what I called Crowley, which is a literateur, which is a word that probably isn't bandied about much, but it really encompasses nonfiction, fiction, articles, everything.
Indeed. Yeah. He almost is one of these tries to do everything type of guys. He even made a Western movie once with his friends. I mean, he was tackling the very fabric of space-time almost in his writings. And people used to criticize him around him and say, "Oh, I don't believe in you, those mystical writings that you fancy." And of course they were probably talking about his Christianity. But when I read that, I was like, whoa, he's really actually quite mystic. Like if you get in a very relaxed, nice couch, like the one that my neighbor Scott helped me get from Goodwill. I got a nice little sofa here with a lamp, and you can just sit here and just, oh, there we're going to read some Chesterton, and fetch some tea and make sure the children are off in the garden playing, and you can almost have like a drug trip. And believe me, I wasn't even drinking or any kind of substances at all, maybe the occasional cigarette when I found Chesterton, but I would literally feel like I was being transported into this, not just on a weird magical trip into fairyland, but like the intellect. If you can somehow merge with the intellect of Chesterton, suddenly you have this kind of this mind-bending universal understanding of all civilizations, of any area that he focuses that laser sight. In Chesterton, in Everlasting Man, there's one chapter where he's just discussing the fact that rather than what the evolutionists are saying, that civilization is always growing and evolving better and better, he's like, no, let's look at these great mighty facts, these two towers of civilization, Egypt and Babylon. And then he just paints this picture of all their gods and their philosophies and what they attain to, and then their decline and their collapse. And in many ways, they were more advanced and more civilized than civilization today. So he uses that kind of imagery in your mind, and then he paints this, look, there's nobody that can say that we didn't have civilization long before that. These civilizations gave you the picture in Egypt and Babylon that humanity was already old, that there has already been so much that's happened before. Whereas everybody likes to start off with saying, well, we have the Fertile Crescent, and then we had the caveman came out, and it's like, no, all we have is just cave drawings from a few. This is what guys do when they go hunting. They're probably just drawing out like, all right, Bob, you're going to come from the right, and Tom's going to get the stag from the left, and you go after the mastodon, Charlie. And that's what we do. We build fires, and men go out and we do things like that. And so what Chesterton really does is he gives you that ability to step out of the mind control, the MK Ultra sort of induced insanity that we live in. We're living in a maniac society. It's really, and it's great that I was in the elevator the other day. I was like, man, I don't have enough time to prepare for this broadcast. Maybe it's good that we're just kind of talking about him universally like this, but
I think so.
I suddenly thought, Chesterton even toyed with insanity. Like he would take breaks from his intellect, and then he would just pretend to be kind of insane. And even that was just so fun. But
that's interesting that you bring up those points, because that's part of this orthodoxy is like, what is best for man? What drives people insane? Their rationalism. But it's also the component or an aspect of the book is his vast knowledge of civilizations. he even puts things in context, puts the Ten Commandments in the context of a lot of those moralisms were universal at that time, that people will look at it as just like, oh, this comes from, the Jewish holy books, but he was like making comparisons. So you see that breadth, the depth of his knowledge and contextualizing his ideas within earlier civilizations. And that, it takes a very learned person to be able to include that into the narrative of his book. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, he really is very needed right now, and I'm so glad that you're introducing him to your audience, as kind of we're all caught up in politics these days. And did you hear about the latest, Russiagate garbage or whatever? These brainwashed, these total insane maniacs are putting out there. When you come back into this type of literature and the joy that is present in everything that he writes, there's so much humor, there's so much just giddy kind of wit that I started thinking, well, maybe all Englishmen kind of have this sort of thing. Well, they do to some extent. It was transferred, I think, into Tolkien and in the writings of Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion kind of stuff, but never to this extent grappling with the enemy. And Crowley really was right when he said that this is the champion of Christendom, kind of a crusader in his time, carrying all of the Victorian intellect that was from the previous era. Because this is literally, when was Orthodoxy written? Like 1904. Doesn't say on my little Bezos book here. But it was before everything had gotten super modern, but it was right at the
1908.
1908. Oh my gosh. But he has in his mind already, his training, all of that Victorian literature and everything that they used to give people back in the day. You'd actually go to school and learn something. And now it's just all, learning about 50 million genders and stuff.
Right.
But if we could get a little bit more mysticky into this, I really want to plumb this Chesterton Crowley paradox. That's something that is, I think, key to, if you look at where we're at right now, what Crowley birthed, with Jack Parsons and NASA and the Nazi occult weird stuff that we're getting.
Right. Before Hitler, I am.
Yeah.
Famous dictum of Crowley, their statement.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I think that you can see them still. You're right. I think it's a great point. You can see them as oppositional forces, really, at that time and the present.
Yeah. Well, because with Chesterton, you have him birthing sort of the Lewis Tolkien kind of where virtue and honor are honored, rather than the Harry Potter kind of, let's just, do weird hocus pocus stuff. And by the way, the wizard's gay and just like whatever.
There's all kinds of Crowley themes in Harry Potter.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Even the words 56, Harry Potter, 5 and a 6 is 11.
I didn't know that.
Pentagram and the hexagram. So he's a magician. He's a born magician. There's all kinds of, the wand that he has is 11 inches, which is Crowley's, prime number in the Book of the Law.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just gets even worse. What is it? He's an alchemist, Harry Potter. So even Potter references the clay of the alchemist.
Yeah.
Not the actual real kind of material alchemist, but the spiritual alchemist, right?
Yes.
Somebody who goes. So Harry Potter, she was very smart if she even wrote it herself. Honestly, I don't even know if I believe her gestational myth about where Harry Potter came from because of the depth of her references. And all very, very, very intelligent. All of the occult stuff, the wisdom of the owls, all that stuff is there. It's just incredible. And even like they go through the 93 and a quarter window to the next world, or go to Hogwarts, and there's Crowley's 93 right there. So they have to say 93, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah. And you can draw that line right through Crowley to her. So, and her, apparently she took on, that K wasn't even a given name. She took on the K, the 11th letter of the alphabet, for her pen, her pseudonym. Yeah. It's not her born name. Yeah. So it gets really heavy duty. Like, yeah.
Well, we're looking at this culture showdown happening right now. Hold on, let me wipe off my glasses here. Yeah.
Culture war.
The wars of good and evil and light and dark are becoming so evident. I would say even just 15 years ago, it was so more gray. It was hard to know that, Bush was actually kind of involved in something as horrible as 9/11, or that the Hollywood industry could be so controlled by the Illuminati, and people like Alex Jones were made fun of most of the time. And it was only if you were in some kind of weird counterculture movement that you would even find that stuff to be true, or maybe a country boy or something, that just somehow knows everything.
You would have to study to find out all the Illuminati cult stuff. You would either have to be an X1 or take that time to really just look into the original texts, which takes a lot of time.
Yep. So, I know we're kind of just broad stroking what Chesterton's writings and, orthodoxy and the foundations that he laid. We can talk a little bit more about it, but just if you look today at how things are really polarizing, now you really see the darkness of the enemy, and just with post birth abortions and the selling of baby parts. Chesterton was the one that first in Everlasting Man. I'll never forget that night when I read him talking about the pagans and then the darkness of the former times, but then that with witchcraft, there's always been a hatred of children and innocence. And I remember reading that being like, really? Yeah. And I was thinking, the witch that boils the children, in the pot, but it really is like that. I had no idea. I was sitting in a Jesuit dorm. God knows what was going on there. There were certain priests that, they were so gay with all their boyfriends going down to the big communal bath house downstairs. And no offense if anyone's got those tendencies, it's not really anything I'm gonna judge, but it was just there was weird stuff going on with priests and students in the
Catholic Church. The priesthood is very gay if they're not pedophiles, or there's not a lot of heterosexual priests, to be honest with you, to my knowledge.
I met some of I believe this Peter Millward guy was a good guy. I think that they kind of gaslighted a little bit, if that's the right term, to have good people in the front working there, and then you have the bad ones in the back. That's kind of what I found in the cult that I was in too. The Children of God is the same thing. Most people were pretty good, but it was just controlled by people that had this extreme satanic kind of pedophile tendency or whatever.
I tell you, at the top of the Catholic Church, there's a lot of occultism, even the Catholic structures and stuff. There's some real dark stuff when you get up to the higher levels. At St. Peter's Square, they have an obelisk that comes from Egypt. You would think that Christendom would want. It was actually brought to Rome by Caligula, literally right in front of St. Peter's. You can look that obelisk up. You would think that it would be the opposite. The Old Testament's railing against these towers and occult things around
amazing
ancient Israelites, and there you have it right in Rome, right in front of your face.
Do you think that might have been on Chesterton's part a little bit of a blind spot, that he chose to just, because he wasn't really honestly investigating everything about Catholicism, he seemed to kind of use it as kind of a bulwark, a fortress of faith from which to, focusing outward at all these New World Order philosophers and Nietzsche and fighting the good fight. But do you think he maybe missed that part? Back then, obviously, it wasn't quite as evil as it is now, too, I think. But.
Well, that's a good point. It might have been different. I think that people are attracted to the church, capital C church, and that may have been Chesterton's desire, was to be I want to be part of this, what they state or ostensibly state as their tradition back to Christ or Peter. So I think that may have been, but it's I'm glad that you brought it up, because for me, at a very surface level, you went back to the Catholic Church, that was where your end was. It's kind of feels like a head scratcher. So, but it doesn't take away from his fundamental writings. For me, I didn't feel like I was reading Catholic as somebody who came up in the Catholic Church, not a very active Catholic by any means, but when I read Orthodoxy, that was not anything in my mind. Like he was repeating Catholic Orthodoxy specific to the Catholic Church, or even to Eastern Orthodoxy or anything. I didn't feel like he was stating that. The Apostles' Creed, to me, is fairly benign. Maybe I should read it again. Although I did read, there was another creed that he was talking about, which was a lot weirder, which was the Nicosian Creed, the one that comes out of the Egyptian Church.
Okay.
Remember that? So he talked about the Trinity, Trinitarians, but yeah, I mean, you also kind of have to parse through and get kind of a finer grain understanding of what his real Catholicism was and how he came at it. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different types of Catholicism too. So anyway, but I probably have the same reservations and misgivings that you have about that.
And I'm sure, if he was here today, I can speak for him. I called him on the phone earlier before the interview, and I honestly, I've had dreams with Chesterton speaking to me while I was engaged with some kind of spiritual warfare against some demon like Pan or something, some, demon of the mind, trying to find. And I recall this so vividly that Chesterton was talking to me, and I didn't even know what his voice sounded like. His voice was actually a little bit high, so I knew.
Is that true?
Listen, there's one recording of him.
Oh, interesting.
He has not quite like Mickey Mouse, but I forget what he sounded like. But he had a higher. I was kind of surprised. You'd think of him as like this deep, sonorous new speaker.
Have you ever heard a recording of Aleister Crowley?
Yes.
Yeah, he was the same way. He had a kind of a high, reedy voice. Oh, to him to Pan. That's the way he sounded.
Really?
He didn't sound scary at all. Like, that's why people would probably walk by him and just thought he was a doddering old weirdo.
Oh, wow.
My him to Pan. The great day of tomorrow. That's the way it sounded. I can play it. I can see if I can find it.
Okay. And since we're being silly here, I guess we could talk a little bit about his sense of humor. This is from a 1911, March 11th, 1911 essay called Two Kinds of Paradox. This is a little quote here. There's nothing that needs more fastidious care than our choice of nonsense. Sense is like daylight or daily air and may come from any quarter or in any quantity, but nonsense is an art. Like an art, it is rarely successful, yet entirely simple when it is successful. Like an art, it depends on the smallest word, and a misprint can spoil it. And like an art, when it is not in the service of heaven, it is always, almost always, in the service of hell. So just the ability to make jokes in his mind, obviously he's in the service of heaven and what he was doing, and his jokes are just so like, they would be meme. These were the memes of 108 years ago that he was writing regularly for newspapers. He was engaged against the libtards of his day, the haters of humanity, the progenitors of eugenics. He wrote a book called Eugenics and Other Evils. And his way of combating them was very much like a superhero movie today, where you got Captain America fighting whatever bad guy, and even though it looks like he's about to lose and the world's about to be destroyed, he still makes jokes. He's like, I could do this all day. And that's like the thing that makes Marvel so successful is the humor. The writers are obviously very talented that they hire, and Chesterton was kind of like that. Like, he would fight these falsehoods and these demons all day, and he would make jokes, and he would be a little bit nonsensical. And the more the smarter you are, the more wisdom you have, the funnier your jokes can be. That's what His
references are good. It brings to mind this quote from C.S. Lewis, like, the devil hates to be mocked, so like you can make fun of him. All right, here's Crowley the poet. Let's fire it up. See if you can hear this. I don't know if it'll work with my headphones. Well, let's see if it'll work. Come on. There you go. Can you hear that?
Die for a harlot. All life with your dog for a woman of solace. A bitter exchange. A bad bargain. Right? It may seem.
That's Crowley, 1920, so he's 45. You there?
I'm trying to find a Chesterton sound now.
Go
Let's get
to YouTube. Let's go back to back. Crowley Chesterton.
I'm trying to find his. This is like a teensy. This is like a 50-second video. Very, very old. 1931.
Okay.
In the modern world of letters,
That's not him. What?
wish to adopt you into the humble. I have to thank you for this very great honor, and I do so with all my heart. I can only say that I am not much of a crusader, but at least I am not a Mohammedan. And many people will testify to the same. I should like to take this opportunity of thanking you all for your enormous kindness, and especially Father Earl for having received me so hospitably today.
There, that's it. That's the
good.
only recording of Chesterton.
I like the sound of his voice. That's a good little humor to start off his talk. It's good.
Yeah, he's definitely a funny guy. You know, if he had a radio mic and if it was accessible in his day, I bet you he would have been a very prolific broadcaster.
I bet. Out there fighting the good fight.
But it's up to us, Mr. Ramsey.
Well, it's actually interesting, too. Another one of his contemporaries was Huxley, right? So he's like writing and referencing Aldous Huxley's dad.
Yes.
Forgot his first name, but, he's going to battle against the evolutionists and really kind of making great points about how they think certain thoughts, but their thoughts really aren't evolving like their so-called scientific materialism is. It is very clever. There's very clever stuff in there.
Wow. What else stood out in orthodoxy as far as having freshly read that? That's gold if you just come out of that nice mental bath.
It's interesting, too, because he credits Huxley, Herbert Spencer, who's another evolutionist, and Bradlaugh back to orthodox theology. So he was analyzing them, and they're like, hold on, these guys don't even pass the smell test. I think he says here. It was Huxley and Herbert Spencer and Bradlaugh who brought me back to orthodox theology. They sowed in my mind my first wild doubts of doubt. Our grandmothers were quite right when they said that Tom Paine and the freethinkers unsettled the mind. They do. They unsettled mine horribly. The rationalists made me question whether reason was of any use whatever. And when I had first finished Herbert Spencer, I had got as far as doubting for the first time whether evolution had occurred at all. So he's reading them and saying that I'm not convinced, right?
Yeah.
So it's like great. The opposite of what you would think. Like, oh, this is actually making me think it's fair.
Well, as where we are in let's just bring things to the fringe too, like Steve Quayle, L.A. Marzulli, all this kind of bringing back the legends of the giants and the Nephilim. And I was on Julian Charles' show, The Mind Renewed, a few weeks ago, and I'm literally at work and messaging him like, what are we going to talk about? He's like, anything but Nephilim, because there's so many shows that everybody wants to do about the Nephilim and the giants. But if you incorporate Chesterton into that kind of understanding, it's interesting to note that he spoke quite a bit about Elfland, that chapter about the ethics of Elfland, and he, of course, takes a more mystical approach to it and philosophical, kind of like it's like a fairy tale, I can't quote it from memory. I haven't read it in a decade, but it's just that return to legends and lore and mythologies and taking them more seriously than even normal histories. I never saw it coming a decade later that we would get into all this fringe stuff, not necessarily the existence of giants that a lot of these people are uncovering. We have a new show on the network about Bigfoot that's fascinating. A couple guys reading Bigfoot accounts and that kind of thing. So it makes you really treasure the worldview and sort of the maybe not very kosher in the eyes of the world, but like the world is so much weirder than what evolution could ever say.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that's definitely another kind of aspect of his writing, at least in the orthodoxy. Yeah, is like it's okay to have he actually, like I said earlier, the imagination triumphs over the materialist rationalist, which you a lot. So
isn't that a quote by Einstein, or did Chesterton?
Perhaps. I don't remember that one.
Imagination.
I have it here in my notes.
Well.
Oh, I think you're right. There is something like that. I think he
Okay.
said imagination is more important than rationalism. I can't remember. But he also, another thing that was interesting, he also kind of counterposes optimism, pessimism as general positions. He included a lot. It goes back to Marcus Aurelius, Greek thought. So you just see that kind of real classical learning that, you know, he wasn't afraid to put into generally Christian apologetical work.
No, not at all. It's amazing that he was tackling literally the philosophies that were going to murder hundreds of millions of people to come in the next decades. You know, his brother died in World War I. He went through that horror of he saw all that trauma, but then he was basically exposing, kind of in a much more gentlemanly way, but basically the InfoWars of his day. It was exposing these evils that were coming, but the way that he did it was with so much optimism. You're right. It was so, you would never feel that sense of despair and hopelessness that you feel when you spent a little bit too much time on YouTube watching one too many documentaries about, and you know, I mean, you have way more guts to face some of this stuff than most of us for long periods of time, but that sense of just like, oh, I've been staring into the abyss a little bit too long again. And the abyss is staring back at me. And I'm feeling yucky today. You know,
it can get pretty dark, man. It's really dark. 9/11 itself is just dark as it gets. But here's Chesterton on optimism. I had often called myself an optimist to avoid the too evident blasphemy of pessimism. But all the optimism of the age had been false and disheartening for this reason, that it had always been trying to prove that we fit into the world. The Christian optimism is based on the fact that we do not fit in the world. So I found that to be pretty interesting. So different bases for optimism. You know, I think that theme is
beautiful.
Definitely plays out in the New Testament for sure.
Well, you know, there's news about the UFOs that the NASA or the Navy and the Air Force are starting to put out there, and it's slowly we're moving towards that disclosure. While the New World Order people have decided that humanity needs to be shut down, we're not going to space anymore, just the robots are. Right. And what an optimistic perspective to look into the cosmos and to bring with us these kind of treasures and to find, you know, God's seed in us, all of us, and to, against that backdrop, see the worshipers and the continuers of the Crowley line, that they're like grasping and grabbling for the chalice of wisdom and power and fame
to keep it for themselves, right?
And behold, I mean, we have a Trump in office, and of course he's being attacked from all directions. Maybe that will fail. Maybe the American experiment will go into this sort of abyss of war that many people have foreseen. But the spirit of liberty and joy and humor and optimism, I mean, we're going to have to go through, I believe, our testing, our time of darkness as prophesied in the Bible. I heard the new Godzilla movie is really good too, to kind of throw one more
in there. Well, I mean, you can put exactly what you're saying right now. Bilderberg is going on in Montreux, right? All these people secretly meeting. They don't want people to know. They literally had a topic called, what was it? I think it was called the weaponization of social media. So, which begs the question, what are the other topics? So are you talking about the weaponization of just regular media? Like that's what kind of that title elicited in my mind, is like, what the hell are you guys talking about? But I think it's a perfect example of like a secret, you know, Marvel level group who are trying to steer the helm of the elite against, you know, just the mass of people. The slave shall serve. It's Crowley's idea. Keep them with the quiet wisdom of the cattle. And I only heard recently that the Bilderberg group, did you hear something that they met in New York before 9/11? Did you hear that story?
I vaguely recall something about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did have a number of meetings before that because of what happened after 9/11 and the Patriot Act in 1 and 2. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, you're right, though. I totally agree. We may go through something in the future. We're going through something now. You know, we've already been through Bush, Obama. Trump is amazing, man. He's really up against very powerful secret forces. The whole idea of the whole Russia thing was just a big scam to waste time, told the statute of limitations. I mean, it's very clever. It's a total psyche bomb. I mean, they worked it out on a variety of different levels. Fool the public, create mass hysteria. So you've just seen you the people of the United States have seen just an incredibly ornate, thought out conspiracy right in front of their face. Whether those people are ever going to get any form of justice from that is unknown to me. It's a massive waste of time too. Massive waste of 2 years.
Exactly. And when you talk to people who are awake about this, it's like, brother, you know, I'll tell you, in Hawaii, it's very hard to find anybody. It'll be like, I'm going out to, you know, get a late beer from the Long's Drugs, and I'll ask the security guard, would you just mind watching my bike for just 1 minute? They're going to close, the alcohol thing closes in 5 seconds. I got to run in there. He's like, all right. And I come out and I'm, thank you. And I talk to him and I find out he's a major red pill wake guy. And I give him my card and I'm like, look, we got this network. We have a studio right here in Waikiki, and we're trying to reach out to other podcasters, or we're networking. And it's like, we're here, man. We're here. We're doing it. And he's like, yeah. And he's like doing the graveyard shift, you know, he's just one in a million. But hey, those are the kind of people that we're talking to, that are listening to your podcast. You have a great audience, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Likewise. I think that a lot of people are unwilling to talk about it in public, because I think a lot of people they're just really hungry for information, good information, which is why CNN, they're literally like YouTubers who have 10 times the audience on a weekly basis than CNN. And these jokers like Don Lemon and Vanderbilt, whatever is Cooper, Tucker, no. Anderson Cooper, Cooper, Vanderbilt, they're getting paid like big dollars to just deceive people. And I don't think it's going to stick for much longer, honestly. And you've seen this thing on YouTube that now the go-to defaults on the algorithms are all these crappy corporate media. Like, oh my God, if you put it through these queries, all you get in response from media is CNN, Fox, MSNBC.
Yes.
Corporate media is disgusting. Yeah. So YouTube is a real problem. I've had so many. Don't even get started on YouTube. So there's a lot of changes happening. Things are still happening in our face, and I think that some of these ideas of Chesterton still remain relevant in current times. Definitely.
Yeah, I hope the audience doesn't think we're just like done talking about him too. Like all the stuff that William Ramsey is talking about on his show is absolutely connected to thousands and thousands of quotes and topics, the paradoxes, the shipwreck of the past, the wonder and wooden. I'm reading Divorce versus Democracy, Mormonism. I mean, he has so much Darwinism and mystery, you know, and the overall spirit of optimism. While you're fighting them, you know, they're trying to ban memes right now. I'll go on Gab or MeWe. If anybody wants to follow me on social stuff, this Kindle goes right to Twitter too. If I highlight something and it pushes share, it only lets me post it to Twitter. So I'm like, okay, they haven't deleted me there yet. So if people want to follow me reading Chesterton, I'm going to be putting lots of quotes to my.
Have you gotten canned off of Facebook yet?
Almost. I'm gearing up for that, because there are messages that I'm just sending in Messenger to friends that are just like, this violates the standard thing. I can't even send a freaking message because the AI algorithms decided I couldn't send that link, or I couldn't send this specific sentence. People are telling me and screenshotting my profile and showing some of the memes that I'm pulling off of other social media sites like MeWe, which I hope people will follow William Ramsey there too.
I'm trying to get do more posts there for sure.
There's this one guy on MeWe that posts the most funniest memes. I'm always grabbing those and reposting them to Facebook and getting in trouble. And Facebook is like, they actually have people like going through memes and checking them to put little like, oh, this isn't true. Obama did help pay for some of those charities for the children, and you know, some meme making fun of how the Obamas barely ever did anything. So
it's interesting to see this phenomenon happen, because I think the powers that be are gearing up for the next election, and they're not going to allow this kind of internet populism to have any roots. So that's why they're kicking people. That's why people are being deplatformed. That's why they're getting rid of all these memes, because the memetics of the Trump campaign, which was really his campaign was a total dumpster fire, but that didn't matter. What mattered is that people were fed up with the nonsense, and they don't want a lifelong, politician, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or anybody else. They don't want them in there. And I think that they're gonna try to fix this one and try to put this old creepy guy and creepy Joe in there, who was just terrible. I mean, it's like a 30-year pop. He's like, got busted. Worst idea
ever.
Oh, he has the worst record. He got busted for cheating in law school. I mean,
really?
He's had all kinds of scandals. Dude. So I think you're really going to see the hammers coming down on the people, and this alternate tech and everything like that is really going to be, especially with this election. I anticipate that these memes or anything critical of Biden, anything that makes fun of him, he looks like, Biden reminds me of is Fire Marshal Bill. The Fire Marshal Bill sketch that's on Living Color?
Oh, yeah.
You should watch Biden's speeches and Fire Marshal Bill together, man, right side by side. He looks like freaking Fire Marshal.
Oh, my gosh.
So all these things that make fun of him are not going to be allowed. They're not going to allow it. So.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway.
Amazing times that we're in. It's hard. I know it's hard to stop everything and go and listen and read something like Chesterton, which even William Ramsey himself has said is not easy to just jump into one of these. You're like, oh, I'm going to read Orthodoxy and Everlasting Men. I'm like, bravo!
I know. I was so overconfident. Classic William Ramsey. Oh, I can pull this off. Let's do this. Come on, let's go. I mean, Orthodoxy, I got to tell you, reading the book was definitely, like you talked about the word edifying, definitely.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, is what effect does it have on you as a Christian? I know you're not some kind of, hallelujah, everybody, I'm on the radio today. Does anybody need a prayer today on the William Ramsey Investigate?
I definitely put myself in kind of like the self, on the, like,
talking.
All right.
I was about to destroy the show. Sorry.
Oh, no, I just got punked it off. I didn't do anything.
Oh, okay. Well, we're still here. So.
Okay. Anyway. I was going to say Orthodoxy. Oh, yeah. I was kind of like I'm like a wretched sinner type Christian. But I think that this book itself was like, it's very sobering, edifying experience. I think altogether positive, because I like the way he contextualizes his arguments. And there's definitely, you really have to sit there and think, reread the paragraphs a couple times. And I didn't really know where he was going with his intro. He was talking about madness and the insane asylum. But I think the summation was really gratifying and very faith affirming for sure. But from a much more austere, intellectual, dispassionate type. Well, not dispassionate, but in a more like an apologetics, really, just an apologetics position. So for me, it was definitely worth the read.
Yes, I think it's worth, if you have any inkling of a desire to go to seminary, just start with reading him, because those dusty old books about orthodoxy are just they're faith killers, really. They sap out all the passion, all the curiosity, all the vibrancy of meeting the real person of Jesus Christ. And one of my other favorite writers, Oswald Chambers, oftentimes brings that out, that in all of our efforts as Christians, like, we need to introduce the real man of Jesus Christ, not talk about him, not talk about the Bible. But if there's a way to introduce people to him, Chesterton is one of those people that actually, I believe, is imbued with that spirit, the living spirit of God. As he's writing, there's just something very anointed about him. He's not just a charismatic guy that knows how to talk and make jokes and be entertaining. He's really kind of a prophet, actually, when you read him. And some of the, like you said, sometimes you're like, where are you going with all this? Because a lot of the times he's just having fun. He's basically, his books, he's basically ranting half the time. But he does read the news, then he goes and he attacks the Aldous Huxleys and the people that were living in their nightmare scenarios, the George Orwell 1984. I mean, George Orwell was way after Chesterton, but I think Huxley was probably
Huxley was right around that time, was a little older. Yeah.
So those concepts of a brave new world, of like living in a machine world, the Matrix, that was being birthed during his time, and he was grappling with that monster. He was Godzilla, like attacking Mothra and all the multi-headed dragon, and he was having a great time. So it's just too, I mean, if you haven't read Chesterton, like, you've really missed out. Like, you really
I agree 100%. I feel like I should have probably read this 20 years ago, but no, I was just not exposed to Chesterton.
Shame on you, William.
Shame on you. I'd say it to my own detriment. But I got to be somewhere at 5:30. Mike, I got to run, bro.
I have another engagement myself.
Well, I think we should do a part 2 and then talk about the Everlasting Man. I think really what
I'll pull out some.
Barely even covered it.
Yeah. That we could just go through just the topic of the structure of each chapter, and then, I mean, that book is the key to an intellectual understanding the gospel against the backdrop of all pagan civilization, and not alienating people. It really brings out the honor of the pagan, and in that kind of picture, it's almost easier to meet Jesus as a pagan rather than some Western, I mean, and we can bring back the Crowley side of that too, that people are just so lost and they've been listening to rock and roll, and not that I don't like rock and roll, but I'm just like, every song has something Crowley in it practically, and we're dealing with people that are in that system. So I'm really looking forward to that, and thank you so much. It's such an honor to get to talk with you. Always,
likewise, man. Likewise,
light,
sure.
And you're a scholar and a gentleman, Mr. Ramsey. So
likewise, I love the tie, man. It's
alrighty.
It's great that you were willing to wear one for the thing. Next
time,
I'm gonna dress up. I'm gonna dress up G.K. Chesterton style next time we talk.
Awesome. Okay.
All right, bro. God bless.
Alrighty. Love you, man. Bye. Bless you.